Story 1. My husband works in the operating room on call, and there have been enough emergency room patients where a husband falls on a mousse, hairspray, or some other sort of can while his wife is at church and has to get it surgically removed from his butt. Story 2. Heartburn. But I don't regret that I went. I had been having severe chest pain for a few days, which then became a tightness due to stress and a rapid heartbeat from panicking, and then my left arm started to tingle. Maybe I was sitting funny? Anxiety attacks can be indistinguishable from a heart attack. Story 3. I ate too many edibles and thought I was dying. Like literally thought my life was coming to an end. I couldn't walk without major difficulty. I couldn't talk because I was slurring so badly. My whole body was shaking, and my heart was pounding. I went to my room with every intention of just going to bed. But I had this revelation that dogs know when people are going to die. So I told my dog if I'm dying then sit. And he sat down. Of course, my fears were then confirmed and I was, in fact, dying. I called 911 and went to the emergency room. Yeah, I made the mistake of telling my family about this and it's like their favorite story ever. They literally tell it at parties. Edit. Sorry for the confusion, everyone. I meant edibles. I usually just call them gummies. Story 4. I was depressed and wasn't refilling the Brita to have water to drink. I also wasn't eating because of the depression. I ended up with a urinary tract infection, dehydration, kidney infection, and walking pneumonia. I was weak and couldn't stand up without fainting. I nearly went into sepsis. This all is to say depression can kill you even if you don't have an active plan to end your life. Story 5. I went to the emergency room because I accidentally stabbed myself with a fork while trying to open a bag of chips. The doctor couldn't stop laughing, and neither could I once the pain wore off. Safe to say I've learned to keep sharp objects away from snack time. Story 6. I vomited every 20 minutes for 10 hours. My dad stayed up all night timing them, emptying my bucket and refilling my water. Went to my primary care physician in the morning and got a shot in my butt. Slept for another 10 hours. Woke up and was in so much pain I thought my appendix had burst. I was screaming and writhing and my parents rushed me to the emergency room. $2,000 in tests later, and they told me nothing is wrong, and it's just my muscles being sore from the extended heaving session and dehydration. They didn't even give me anything, not even an intravenous therapy. Story 7. Attacked by a Christmas tree. I was reaching behind my tree to unplug the lights and somehow managed to dislocate my knee in the process. Paramedics had to fish me out of my Christmas tree, which had fallen on top of me. Ho ho ho. Story 8. I tripped on the stairs and whacked my shin super hard against the metal edge trim. It swelled up and bruised badly, so I went in. They couldn't get an image of the bone because of the large hematoma there. They also couldn't cast me or bind it in any way because of compartment syndrome and similar issues. I couldn't have a boot or a scooter because they'd press on the area. So they gave me a tetanus shot because I had broken the skin on metal and mine was out of date, and sent me home to heal like a medieval peasant. Leg up all the time, only up to go to the bathroom and shower, for at least 2 weeks. I inspected my leg every day, and even with minimal gravity, I watched the hematoma break up and discolor everything down to blotches on the bottom of my foot. After 2 weeks, I went back and they imaged again. They could see where the break was healing, so they sent me home for another week off work with more light duty at home, and that was that. But yeah, tripping on the stairs and banging my shin. Story 9. Pain in the quadrant of my chest containing my heart. Fun fact, when you say that at the emergency room, they treat it very seriously because they think you're having a heart attack. Well, after about 5 hours and a bunch of x-rays, it turned out that it was most likely just irritations from muscle spasms rubbing up against my bones. They ruled out pretty much anything involving my heart and my other organs, so they figured that was just the most likely explanation. It went away after a couple of days. I get the post is about stuff like stubbing your toe, but I honestly felt so embarrassed at that moment. I think a lot of the nurses were upset with me when they discharged me too. I didn't even mean to go to the hospital. It was just next to urgent care, and urgent care was closing since this happened around 10 p.m. But they said they were closing, so I figured the emergency room is across the street. Might as well see what they have to say. Story 10. I was working in the storeroom when I heard the announcement that summoned any male staff over the intercom. As I was going into the emergency room from the back way, I met a sweaty drunken guy with no shirt, covered in blood from a cut on his head, who was trying to get out, but he couldn't because he didn't know the code until I opened the door. He tried to push past me, but the nurse yelled for me to grab him, so I turned him around and led him by the arm back to the treatment room, where I got to wrestle with him while they strapped him down. Security stood there doing nothing while I did the work. Later, the police came and were apparently on a first-name basis with the guy. The story was that the man upset his wife, and she hit him on the head with a frying pan. Story 11. Finals night during my first semester of college. I consumed a lot of energy drinks to study, then took a lot of Benadryl because I wanted to get some sleep and wake up early to study instead. I thought I was dying. My whole body was tingling. My heart felt irregular, and I couldn't breathe. I went to the emergency room, and they told me, "Yeah, you gave yourself a poor man's speedball." They gave me a lot of fluids and sent me on my way. I still made it to my 10 a.m. final across campus. Surprisingly, I never graduated from college. Story 12. Caught the mouse in my basement by hand and it bit me. Went to the emergency room at 3 a.m. just for them to tell me there was nothing they could do since mice very rarely have rabies. Story 13. This week I went to labor and delivery at 23 weeks pregnant, convinced that my water broke and with increasingly painful cramps. Turns out I just have a terminal case of pregnancy wet and puffiness. Story 14. My daughter kept having off-and-on fevers and throwing up. We took her to the emergency room. Turns out she got E. coli. How? By sticking her hand in one of the fish exhibits at the aquarium and licking her fingers clean. Story 15. I was on the toilet, sat there for a bit too long on my phone. I stood up too quickly due to iron deficiency, and I fell and hit my head on the windowsill. This bathroom was on the second floor. I woke up about 5 minutes later in a puddle of blood. It was very fun. Story 16. Sliced the web part of my hand between thumb and pointer wide open with the short blade of a Swiss Army knife. I was trying to get to the middle of a golf ball to see what was inside. There was a lot of blood. Story 17. Gestured too wildly at a dinner party and knocked a full cup of nearly boiling tea onto my lap. Had to strip off my pants in front of my boyfriend's parents, and a bunch of my leg skin went with it. The emergency room treated me well. Luckily, it was just a deep second-degree burn, so I was out of bandages in 2 weeks. Story 18. A puppy I was playing with stepped on my hand, and my knuckles scraped the concrete. I washed it and put peroxide on it. Well, a day or two later, I was at work and showed my coworkers how this red line was growing from my knuckle and was at my wrist. This was before the internet, and they suggested I call a nurse. She immediately told me to get to the hospital. I felt so stupid waiting in line with serious injuries, and when I was called and asked what was wrong, I said, "I hurt my finger." Once they saw the line that was up my forearm, I was ushered back, and it was painfully scrubbed. Story 19. Kidney stones that turned out to be an asymptomatic urinary tract infection because I didn't urinate for an hour after sex in the woods. Apparently, when you have everything but the telltale burning sensation, they call it asymptomatic, and it's incredibly common to get them that way when pregnant. Worse, they tend to remain asymptomatic forevermore once you've had one that way while pregnant. If it happens while not pregnant, they mostly go back to burning again later. Wire bodies. Story 20. I have never personally gone to the emergency room for anything embarrassing, but I worked in an emergency room and have seen a few things. One female in her late 20s came in because she said she had a crack in her vagina. So the doctor gets out the equipment to do an examination. He told her he didn't see anything abnormal. She said, "I have a crack right here." He begins to tell her she was supposed to have a crack there because that's the way the vagina is made to be. I was in total shock. This is something a 3-year-old would say, not something a 20-something-year-old woman would just now discover. The other one was a 30-something female who came in with vaginal spasms. I was not assigned to that patient, but she was quickly released. Story 21. I ran over a friend's foot. They were sitting in the back seat of my car at the time. I figured taking them to the emergency room and staying with them was the least I could do. Story 22. I took a dab and my heart rate spiked to 180 to 190 beats per minute. I thought I was going to die and ended up at the emergency department. I felt like an idiot after the weed wore off. Story 23. My 3-year-old got a jelly bean stuck in his nose, and my dad, his grandfather, tried to see how he could have done this by using a coffee bean which got stuck in his nose. Story 24. When I was 10, I was blow-drying my hair and thought since my hair was fluffy, my cat Fluffy would like it. Needless to say, she scratched me badly. My mom had to take me to the emergency room for massive scratches all over my arms and chest. I still have the scars but have never used a hairdryer since. Fluffy lived another 15 years, happy as can be, as I gave her extra snacks all the time after that. Story 25. Once I started a new diet very rapidly and became constipated as a consequence. I didn't poop for 12 days and started to feel painfully bloated. One CT scan later, they said I was full of waste, handed me a laxative and told me good luck. I spent the next day using the restroom every 30 minutes, losing a total of around 10 to 15 pounds despite drinking a large amount of water. Story 26. Decided it was a good idea to ride my 4-year-old stallion without lunging him long enough after a 10-day solid ice freeze. Alone, because I was in a rush. Hello, broken bones. Story 27. Didn't make it to the emergency room, but I had been out drinking and got home and vomited in the toilet. Looked down and saw only red and thought, oh no, I'm dying. Called the ambulance and they came and took one look at the vomit. The ambulance staff asked, have you been eating strawberries tonight? And in my drunken state, I said, yeah, we had them for dessert. They gave me a pat on the back, wished me a happy hangover tomorrow, and left. Story 28. Panic attacks that felt like heart attacks. It was awful. It would go away and then an intense wave would hit, and my heart rate and blood pressure would spike. It eventually stopped, but I went back at least 3 times before getting an echocardiogram and other tests done, to be told to lose weight and go to therapy. Story 29. I was about 6 years old. I was playing with my sister in her room, and something compelled me to put a small rock up my nose. It went all the way down and I couldn't get it out. I went to my dad, who rightfully recognized that this was actually very dangerous and took me to the emergency room. I was seen right away. The doctors were preparing me, and I sneezed it out. Story 30. I got my first jacket with pockets and thought I was so cool, so I kept my hands in them the whole time, even though it wasn't that cold. We were walking a lot that day and tripped over a slightly raised sidewalk from tree roots. I ended up hitting my head and having a large amount of bleeding. I was like 4. Story 31. My friend dragged his foot along the carpet. There was a toothpick there and it went into his foot. We went to the emergency room, waiting 4 hours for them to grip it and rip it. Story 32. Severe pain in my testes for over 6 hours. Could not do anything but lie in bed because the pain was so bad. I knew it was because of my epididymitis, and I could not take another day in pain. I went to the emergency room and told them what I had and needed it fixed. They did an ultrasound and told me I did not have testicular torsion, so I should take some acetaminophen and go home. It has been 7 years of daily pain. I have not had a doctor willing to push to get me a computed tomography scan to actually see how bad it is. Antibiotics did not work when it was first diagnosed by the one doctor I had trust in. I moved out of state and lost insurance before I could get more help from him. I honestly think I am going to need surgery to drain the infection site and try stronger antibiotics or take them longer than 2 weeks. Story 33. A friend of mine in college went to the emergency room after trying to use an open safety pin as a toothpick, accidentally swallowing it, and getting an open safety pin stuck halfway down his throat. He said half the emergency room staff was crowded around the X-ray, laughing. Story 34. My grandmother died at the hospital. We went home afterward, and my family was standing in the backyard talking. I took one step off the deck and sprained my ankle. I immediately fell into the grass writhing in pain. My dad thought I was joking. My whole ankle immediately turned blue. I had to go back to the same hospital my grandmother died at literally 2 hours prior. Or the time I rode on the front cargo rack of a four-wheeler and we hit a tree head-on. I broke my leg in 3 places. Note to self: ride behind the handlebars and, for Christ's sake, wear a helmet. Story 35. A friend was suffering from some paranoid delusions brought on by pills and possibly other substances. She called emergency services and asked them to send an ambulance for me. I did not overhear the phone conversation, but whatever she said made them worried enough to deem me a danger to myself. By the way, I have never done drugs nor been suicidal. Paramedics came and they said if I did not come willingly, they would have the police assist in restraining me. One way or another, I was headed to the hospital, so I decided to go with them. I mean, how bad could it be? They had me in this room with nothing but a bed with straps. I was okay for a while, but an hour passed, then 2, 3, and so on. Now I was having a crisis and beginning to spiral. I didn't know what to do, so I just tried to cause a commotion, screaming and yelling and pounding the walls, hoping I'd at least annoy them enough that they would want me gone. It didn't work at first. They put up with my racket for an impressive amount of time, actually. I suppose it's nothing new for them. Eventually, they did have enough, though. 7 people came into the room to hold me down on the table and strap me in. They were going to give me sedatives. I fought like hell and tried to speak reason, but no one would even look me in the eye. I said whatever I could think of, including asking them, "What if I were your daughter? I know you know this is wrong." One of the men and a woman were quietly crying. It did make me feel better that there were at least some humans in the room with me. I resisted like my life depended on it, trying not to hurt anyone, as hard as I could. But they got one strap on me after another until it was impossible for me to move. Then they stuck me with the needle. Somehow it had no effect on me, or maybe it did, but I was so riled up at that point I certainly couldn't feel it. I kept up the screaming and such, and although I was there for several hours, 8 total I think, they did eventually get sick of my behavior and released the hold. It blew my mind this could be allowed in the United States or any first world country for that matter. Literally being abducted from my home on someone else's word.